My name's Daniel, I'm 31, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that sometimes the people meant to love you the most are the ones who end up hurting you the deepest while smiling for the camera. I've spent most of my adult life pretending it doesn't hurt anymore, that their words don't sting, that the little comments, the exclusion, the jabs cloaked as jokes, they don't bother me. But they do. God, they do. And on the night of my sister's engagement party, my mother found one last way to remind me I was nothing but a side character in my own family. My younger sister, Eliza, is 28. She's beautiful, charismatic, and always seems to be exactly what my parents wanted in a child. She got the dance recitals, the graduation parties, the big hugs and teary speeches. I got, "You'll figure it out eventually, Danny." I was the quiet kid, the old soul. I liked books more than basketball. I got a degree in environmental science instead of business, and I chose a career with meaning over money. It's not that I was ever jealous of Eliza. I love her truly. But growing up, our parents built her pedestal out of every expectation I never met. The engagement party was held at this sleek little rooftop venue downtown, wrapped in string lights and overpriced charcuterie boards. The moment I walked in, I could feel it, like I always do. That subtle shift when people notice me, but not in a good way. My mother gave me a once-over, her eyes scanning my off-the-rack blazer like it was a bathrobe. She didn't say anything at first, just smiled that tight-lipped smile and patted my shoulder like I was the dog they weren't sure they wanted to adopt. The room was full of her friends and my father's business associates, all cooing over Eliza and her fiancé, Connor. He's decent enough, if not a little too proud of his own handshake. I made the rounds, said hi to my cousins, hugged Eliza, and even tried making small talk with Dad. But he was too busy introducing Connor to the right people. At one point, my Aunt Cheryl asked what I was doing these days, and before I could answer, Mom swooped in and said, "He's still playing with trees or frogs or whatever it is. Isn't that right, Danny?" Laughter followed, tight and polite, but I felt my ears go hot. I just smiled. I'm good at that part. I've had 30 years of practice. Things escalated slowly, the way they always do with her. She wasn't outwardly cruel. Just enough passive aggression to keep me simmering, not boiling. "We're just so proud of Eliza," she told the table during dinner. "She's really made something of herself. And look at this party. You know, not everyone gets to have a night like this. Some people just coast through life." Then came the wine, and with it, her courage. After the toasts, the applause, and Eliza's emotional speech about family being everything, Mom found her moment. We were all standing near the cake, some obnoxious five-tier tower with gold flakes and edible roses, when she leaned toward me and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "You'll never have a night like this, Danny. You were always the disappointment." Just like that. The air changed. A few people looked uncomfortable. Others laughed awkwardly. My father raised his eyebrows but didn't say a word. Eliza didn't even glance in my direction. I think the worst part wasn't the insult. It was that everyone around me just accepted it. Like this was a script they'd seen a dozen times and didn't have the energy to protest. I laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't trust myself to do anything else. But what no one knew, not Eliza, not Mom, not even me until a week prior, was that I'd already made a call. One call. One conversation that had nothing to do with revenge, at least not when I placed it. It had started as something innocent, something meant just for me. But now, as I stood there with champagne in my hand and a fake smile on my face, I realized exactly what that call would mean for all of them. And it made me smile for real this time. See, 2 years ago, I started consulting on a massive conservation project, reclaiming and redeveloping a neglected stretch of land just outside the city. It had once been a landfill, but with enough funding and the right team, it was being transformed into a nature reserve and eco-center. It was my dream project, quiet, impactful, and totally outside the radar of my family's cocktail circuit. They never asked about my work, so I never volunteered. But 3 weeks ago, my boss had a stroke. I was asked to step in temporarily as interim project director. A huge responsibility. It also meant signing off on final zoning permits and land acquisitions. One of those acquisitions? A historic farmhouse property right at the edge of the reserve, one that my father, unbeknownst to me, had bought quietly a few years ago through a shell company. He planned to bulldoze it and build luxury condos. Our plans, however, were different. And as interim director, I had the authority to make the call. We decided the farmhouse would be preserved, protected under the historical trust guidelines we just secured. When I saw the name on the paperwork, my stomach dropped. But I didn't say anything. Not then. Instead, I called our legal liaison, confirmed the final acquisition, and signed the transfer agreement. All very official. All very permanent. I hadn't connected the dots until the week before the engagement party, when I overheard my father on the phone with someone, bragging about the project finally breaking ground next month. That's when I knew. And that's when I smiled. Because the land deal was done. Locked in. And once it was announced, there would be no way to reverse it. No profit. No development. Just a big, beautiful green space and one very angry father. But it wasn't just about the land. It was about being forgotten, dismissed, treated like I was lucky to be tolerated. That engagement party was the last straw. But the truth? The resentment had been growing like roots beneath the surface for years. I just never let it bloom. Until now. So when my mother laughed and said I was the disappointment, and everyone smiled like they always did, I smiled too. Because they had no idea that everything they thought they were building was about to collapse. And it all started with one call. I didn't stay much longer at the engagement party. After that little public jab, I politely excused myself, hugged Eliza, who barely noticed, and told her I had an early morning meeting. That was technically true. I just didn't tell her the meeting was with our project PR team. We were drafting the official press release that would go out in less than 48 hours. Historic Hillcrest Farm to be preserved as protected green space under new conservation plan. The timing wasn't just strategic. It was poetic. 2 days later, the article was on every local news site and shared all over social media. Photos of the farmhouse. Quotes from our team about prioritizing ecological and cultural value over private development. Even my name got a quiet shout-out in the final paragraph. Daniel Price, interim project director, led the acquisition initiative after months of negotiation. I'd fought for that last line, too. Not out of vanity, but because I wanted him, my father, to read it and know. And boy, did he. The first call came before lunch. I didn't answer. Then came a few texts, each one colder than the last. We need to talk. What did you sign off on? You have no idea what you've done. I let them pile up, each more frantic than the last. I read them while sipping my coffee and listening to birdsong outside my apartment window. Peaceful. Clean. A contrast to the chaos I knew was unraveling on their end. Around 5 p.m., I finally got the call I had been waiting for. Daniel. It wasn't a question or a greeting. Just my name, clipped and sharp. My father's voice was lower than usual, like he was trying to stay calm. Hi, Dad, I said casually, leaning back in my chair. What is this I'm reading? About Hillcrest? I asked, knowing full well he'd read every word. Yeah, big win for the team. That land's gonna stay wild for decades. Kids' programs, walking trails. You knew I owned that land. I didn't, until recently, I said, letting the silence stretch. But once I did, I followed protocol. That was my investment. Years of planning. That deal cost me. I know, I cut in, my tone still light. But see, it wasn't zoned for residential development. Never really was. You were just hoping no one would notice. And if anyone else had been sitting in my chair, maybe no one would have. He went quiet. For a second, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then he said, slowly, you did this on purpose. I didn't deny it. Not directly. You called me a disappointment for 30 years, I said, finally letting some of the weight in my chest rise to the surface. You all did. Maybe not always in words, but in looks, in jokes, in the way I was tolerated instead of embraced. And you expected me to keep showing up, keep smiling, keep funding your retirement with my silence. You don't understand what you've done, he hissed. Oh, I understand perfectly. I hung up after that. The next morning, my mother showed up at my apartment. No call, no warning, just a knock at the door, like she owned the building. When I opened it, she was already in full performance mode. Tight blazer, dramatic sighs, wounded eyes. Daniel, she began. I think we've had a misunderstanding. Is that what we're calling it now? I stepped aside, mostly because I didn't want a scene in the hallway. She walked in like she hadn't spent the last 2 decades tearing me down with a smile. You've embarrassed your father, she said, turning to face me. And quite frankly, you've embarrassed yourself. By preserving a historic site? I asked. By doing my job? Her lips tightened. You know what I mean. I just stared at her, waiting. You've always been so sensitive, she said finally, as if that explained everything. This need to prove yourself, it's exhausting. And it's not just us. Eliza. Don't bring Eliza into this, I said. She's got her own life. This is between you, Dad, and me. She sat down without asking, like she used to when I was a kid, and she'd barge into my room to scold me for something Eliza did. You've always acted like we were against you, that we didn't love you enough, didn't see you. But we raised you. We gave you everything. I laughed quietly. No, you gave Eliza everything. You gave me reminders of how I wasn't her. Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward her, opening the article. I scrolled to the photo of the farmhouse, the one her husband planned to turn into luxury condos. This was your investment. Something that would have torn up Greenland, displaced wildlife, destroyed a century-old structure because Dad wanted to turn a quick profit. And you were fine with it. You always are, as long as there's champagne and photo ops. Her jaw clenched. It was just business. And this, I said, pointing at my name in the article, is mine. The silence hung thick in the room. For the first time in years, she looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. Like I was a real person. Not the disappointment she brought to events out of obligation. You're not invited to the wedding, she said suddenly, sharply. It was like flipping a switch. The performance ended. The mask dropped. I tilted my head. Whose wedding? Eliza's. She doesn't want you there after this stunt. I stood up and walked to the door. That's fine, I said, opening it. Send me the bill if you want. Seems like that's all I ever get invited for anyway. She looked like she wanted to slap me, but she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked past me without another word. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For once, I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one walking away. And this time, the story was only getting started. 2 days passed in silence. No texts. No calls. Not from my mother. Not from my father. Not even from Eliza. At first, it felt strange. Like a phantom itch where a wound used to be. For so long, I'd been conditioned to brace for the next jab, the next cold comment wrapped in silk, the next party where I'd stand by the wall like a placeholder while they all toasted each other. The quiet was unnerving, but it was also freeing. Like I was finally stepping out of a fog I hadn't realized I'd been living in. I went back to work, and for once, I didn't downplay my role. I took meetings. I fielded interviews. Our firm was suddenly the talk of the city's environmental circles. A few smaller publications wanted quotes. One even asked if I'd be open to speaking at a community event in a few weeks about sustainable urban development. Normally, I'd pass that opportunity to someone higher up. But not this time. I said yes. By the end of that week, I was actually proud. Not quietly proud. Openly proud. And then, just as I was starting to believe maybe the storm had passed, a call came through. It wasn't a number I recognized, but the second I heard the voice on the other end, I tensed. Eliza. She sounded tired. Not angry. Not cold. Just worn out. Hi, I said cautiously. I'm not calling to fight, she said quickly, like she already knew how defensive I'd be. I want to understand. I waited, unsure what she meant. Dad is furious, she continued. Mom hasn't stopped pacing for 3 days. They're acting like you've destroyed everything. And I guess, in some ways, you did. But not in the way they're saying. I sat down at my kitchen table, pressing the phone to my ear. So why are you calling? She hesitated. Because I don't know how to feel. I mean, you're my brother. And I know Mom and Dad weren't exactly subtle about playing favorites. But you blindsided them. You blindsided me. That stung, even if I expected it. Eliza, I said, keeping my voice calm, I didn't do this to spite you. I did it to stop pretending everything was okay. You could have told me, she said. You could have said something. I let out a breath. And would it have mattered? She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, I don't know. There was a long pause. I read the article, she said. The one where they quoted you. I didn't even know you were working on something like that. Because no one ever asks. That silenced her again. Eliza, I said gently, do you remember my graduation party? She laughed bitterly. You mean the barbecue where Dad invited all his clients, and Mom left halfway through to help plan my homecoming? That's the one. She sighed. Yeah, I remember. I spent the whole day smiling for pictures. Trying to pretend it didn't hurt. Trying to be grateful they even showed up. I thought if I kept being the good son, the quiet one, the helper, maybe someday I'd matter. You matter, she said quietly. Not to them. Another pause. I didn't want you to find out this way, I added. But when Mom made that comment at your engagement party, I just realized I was done playing along. I'm not their doormat. I'm not their silent sponsor. I've built something. On my own. And for once, I wanted to stand by it. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then, barely above a whisper, "You're still invited to the wedding." "I don't care what Mom says." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need time." "And maybe you do too." "Yeah," she agreed. "Maybe we both do." We said goodbye. And for the first time in our adult lives, it felt like we'd actually spoken as equals. That night, I checked the project's inbox. One message stood out: subject, urgent, press inquiry. It was from a major local station. They wanted to do a segment on our conservation efforts, and they specifically asked for an on-camera interview with the young director who made the final call. I stared at the screen. All my life, I'd been the background character in someone else's celebration. Now they wanted me front and center. But something about it didn't sit right, not just yet. Because there was one more piece to the story that hadn't fallen into place. One more loose thread tugging at my piece. My father hadn't just been investing in the land. He'd been using it. I'd seen the records, permits filed, contractors contacted, blueprints drawn. But something about the numbers didn't add up. The farmhouse and surrounding acreage were too small for the massive condo plan I'd seen mentioned in an old investor report. And the shell company he used wasn't just tied to that one property. It was tied to five parcels of land, all adjacent, all quietly purchased over the last 4 years, all likely intended for a mega development. And 3 of them weren't under conservation protection. Yet, if he thought I'd stopped at Hillcrest, he had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep much that night. The moment I realized Hillcrest was just the beginning, everything else began to click into place. The shell companies, the unusual urgency in my father's texts, the silent rage behind my mother's visit. This wasn't just about losing a house. He had been planning something huge, something carefully layered behind fake names and LLCs, and Hillcrest wasn't a prize to him. It was a keystone, the crown jewel in a development empire he had spent years quietly assembling under the radar. And I had just shattered the cornerstone. By morning, I had a full pot of coffee brewed, my laptop open, and folders spread across my desk like the opening move of a chess game. I'd learned to keep records, emails, permits, purchase histories. Call it paranoia. Call it self-preservation. Either way, I had them. I even had a few of the blueprints I'd found in a public records folder last year, stashed away and forgotten until now. It wasn't just one building. It was an entire luxury village, condos, retail outlets, even a proposed golf course. And my father had banked everything on it going unnoticed. Until I noticed. I looped in our firm's legal department and the environmental compliance team, quietly sharing what I had discovered. I made it clear I wasn't accusing anyone on our side of wrongdoing. I just wanted to ensure we weren't complicit in anything shady. I didn't name my father. I didn't need to. The paperwork spoke for itself. Within hours, our legal advisor flagged the parcels. 3 of the properties were under review by our district's environmental council for potential rezoning, a process we could, with the right evidence, influence, especially if those developments were based on faulty or hidden disclosures. That was the final domino, and I didn't even need to push it myself. One of our contacts at the city council reached out privately the next day. Apparently, word had started spreading that someone inside the conservation firm had uncovered questionable dealings tied to a large-scale land development. The kind of news that doesn't stay quiet for long. The local press had caught wind, and so had the state's zoning board. And then the lawsuit started. It began with a cease and desist order from the environmental council to the developer, my father's shell company. Then came a formal investigation into potential zoning fraud and undeclared environmental risks on 2 of the parcels. Suddenly, everything he'd built, every silent acquisition, every carefully faked signature, every backroom deal, was exposed to sunlight. And it withered. My phone rang on a Thursday evening, just after sunset. I had expected the call for days, but I still let it go to voicemail. The message was short, not angry, not demanding, just hollow. "This is your father. I suppose you think you've won, that you've accomplished something, but all you've done is burn everything down. I hope you're proud." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. By the end of that month, 2 of the properties had been officially transferred to our project through emergency conservation acquisition. We'd secured new funding after the story hit regional headlines. People were furious, not at me, but at him, a developer who had nearly wiped out protected wetlands for profit. The outcry was swift, loud, and very, very public. I didn't say a word to the press. I didn't need to. The paper trail said it all. Eliza called again. This time, she wasn't upset. I don't even know who they are anymore, she said softly. Dad barely leaves his office. Mom keeps talking like it's all some misunderstanding. Like you tricked everyone. I didn't trick anyone, I replied. I just stopped being silent. She paused. I wish I'd stood up for you sooner. You were raised to protect their image. I don't blame you. She sighed. I still want you at the wedding. I'll be there, I said. And I was. I didn't show up in a designer suit or rent a flashy car to prove a point. I didn't make speeches or soak in applause. I just sat quietly in the third row, surrounded by strangers and second cousins. But this time, when my mother looked my way with that familiar expression, half annoyance, half amusement, I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I simply smiled. She looked away first. Eliza thanked me in her speech. Just one line. But it was enough. And to my brother, Daniel, whose quiet strength reminds me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. There was no dramatic applause, no slow turn of heads, but I caught the twitch in my father's jaw, the way my mother's wine glass stalled halfway to her lips. It was subtle, but it was real. After the wedding, as the guests filtered out and the lights dimmed, I started toward the exit. That's when he stopped me. My father. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe I'd just finally grown beyond the version of me that feared him. I built all of that for our family, he said flatly. You destroyed it. No, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. You built it for yourself. And you buried the family to do it. I just stopped letting you use my silence as permission. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. And then, the words that sealed it all. You're not welcome in our home. I know, I said. That's why I'm finally building my own. I walked away. And I never looked back. Months passed. The project thrived. Our eco-center broke ground in the spring. Schools scheduled field trips. Retired volunteers came to plant trees. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't profitable in the way my father would have admired. But it was real. It was mine. I eventually bought a small house not far from Hillcrest, one of the older homes that had survived the development era. It had a crooked fence and creaky floors and an oak tree that scratched the window during storms. But it was peaceful. It was quiet. And for the first time in my life, it felt like home. Eliza visited often, sometimes with Connor, sometimes alone. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. There was something healing in the unspoken acknowledgement of what had happened and who we had become. One afternoon, she brought over an old photo album. It had been in our parents' attic, buried behind boxes of decorations and tax files. Thought you might want to see it, she said, setting it on my table. I opened it cautiously. Childhood birthdays, trips to the lake, school plays. There were photos of her in every dress, every trophy ceremony, every holiday event. And then, buried near the back, a single photo of me. I must have been around 10, holding a frog, grinning ear to ear, mud on my jeans. You always loved that pond, she said. I smiled. It's part of the reserve now. We sat in silence for a long time. You're not the disappointment, she said. I never was, I replied. And for the first time, I believed it.